This video is a segment from the Fantasy for Real podcast, which can be found linked in the description or by searching on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So next up, I'm going to talk about Ladd McConkey, who is one of my most controversial grades. Ladd McConkey is 22 years, 10 months as of September 1st, which means he will turn 23 during the season. So he's fairly old, but not one of the older prospects I've ever evaluated. He's also 5'11 and a half, 187 pounds, and has 30 and 1/8 inch arms. Now, only one of those measurements is not a problem for me, which is the 5'11 and a half, but that's something I want to talk about a little bit later because it really relates to the traits, and I don't want to go back and forth with talking about it. My biggest issue with McConkey is the production. Every single slight adjustment I make to the wide receiver position and how I scout the wide receiver position is to really help me identify who I believe should have the red flags when it comes to things like production. So for example, Roman Wilson, while he has a low volume overall, his proportional production is really helped out by the fact that he had a low passing volume offense that was also extremely slow, so he still scores fairly highly in the proportional production. Ladd McConkey was on a team that threw the crap out of the football, and I think that's not said enough because people say Georgia offense, Georgia offense, Georgia offense, and I get it because it's very systematic in how it runs, but there were so many passing yards to go around. He should have had more than 700. If Roman Wilson, it's the same thing. If Roman Wilson had 700 on a team that had 4,600, I would not like Roman Wilson nearly as much as I do. And I know there's so many other things that go into it. I know it's a very involved conversation, but at the end of the day, that is a big scale difference to me because Ladd McConkey is the only player on my board that has a true red flag. Because every other player, like say an A.D. Mitchell, okay, A.D. Mitchell is close to the red flag area, but he's still an early declare. He's close to the red flag area, but he missed one of his three college seasons with his sophomore year almost entirely with injury. He had a really good freshman season. So really it's just that he didn't do well as a junior that we're really focusing on A.D. Mitchell, and then he declared early as an early declare. So do I have a ton of problems with A.D. Mitchell's profile? Sure, but compared to Ladd McConkey is the only production profile, and that's why he's not in my top 12. He's the only production profile that other people talk about a lot that is just blood red to me. And I know people don't talk about him as a production-based wide receiver, but it's just rare to me to project so highly a wide receiver who has done so little because I think people are getting too archetypal. There's a lot of things to like in the archetype of Ladd McConkey because he stops so well, and that's a big trait for me, the way he decelerates, not just the way he speeds up, but the way he decelerates, the way he understands nuance. And I watched 5 full All-22s before I even started writing this segment, some of them from 2023, but also some of them from 2022, because I really wanted to make sure I was seeing it right. And I see all the things I think that a lot of other people see. It's just the translation to me is not quite the same in how I believe that it's going to potentially translate to the next level. Not necessarily because I believe it can't be like that. When I watch Ladd McConkey, I do see a guy who could be like a Wes Welker. And sorry for the comps that are about to come, but I do see a guy who could be like a Wes Welker. And I do understand where that comes from. But to me, that is an extreme projection and something that I don't know why people are so willing to bet on it at the end of the day. It's interesting because the NFL copies itself a lot. And with Puka Nacua, you saw a wide receiver who was a project, but was not necessarily built like DK Metcalf. And my theory is that the NFL is catching on to all of these production things, obviously, because the biggest misses that they've had, what fantasy's been saying for years, that the biggest misses that the NFL has are the NFL misses that don't have production. And that's fairly true in recent history. And so you're seeing, I think, a lot of teams that are analytically based make more and more of their decisions based on that. And I understand the idea behind, okay, now we're going to look for project wide receivers that have really good route running and really good hands, as opposed to look for really good project wide receivers that look like worse versions of DK Metcalf. I totally think that is a good way to go about it, but it's kind of like the anti-Moneyball, because the whole point of like a Moneyball-esque concept is that you identify a market inefficiency and then you buy it up as a market inefficiency. This is, I've identified a market inefficiency, so let's pay 4 times as much for it. And that makes no sense to me. Ladd McConkey is being valued at a rate that's way higher than this profile has ever been valued before. And have we misevaluated this profile before? I think so, but I also feel like this is a massive overcorrection, right? So on one of the earlier shows, I mentioned people figuring out Ladd McConkey as being a reason that I didn't really like Ladd McConkey. And that sounded really vague, and I didn't love the way it sounded, but I also didn't really know if I should go further into detail. And there's an element of this that is maybe in the terms of the elusiveness, the route running, the nuance, because we haven't seen it tested as often, that maybe we are overrating the route running against air. And I do subscribe to that just a little bit as a potential theory of what could bring down Ladd McConkey, but that's not really what I mean. What I mean by that is physical play, which is what gets into the size. Now, not as many people talk about arm length, but 5'11 and a half makes you think that his size is pretty decent for an outside wide receiver, but 30 and 1/8 inch arms are very, very small arms for an outside wide receiver. And so when you combine that with 187 pounds, two of his three measurements that I look at for a physical wide receiver, which are important things specifically for projecting a wide receiver outside, are very poor. They're not even not that good. They're pretty outright bad. And so Ladd McConkey is this player from the very beginning, before I dug into anything, before I realized how bad his proportional production was on my own scale. The very first note you write down, I think almost anybody writes down, is this guy inside or is he inside-outside versatile? And when you look at the arm length in history, when you look at the weight in history, these are not things that profile as an outside wide receiver. So I see him as more of an inside guy, and I think at the point of attack, you are going to worry about things physically. You are going to worry about those first 5 yards. You are going to worry about the catch point. And so because I am worried about these things, because I haven't seen them proven, right? If Ladd McConkey was a guy like Devonta Smith, who he had these physical red flags, but his whole tape was him proving that the physical red flags didn't hold him back, that would be a different story. Ladd McConkey has all these things I'm concerned about and no production to prove that he's not that guy. So at the end of the day, could Ladd McConkey be the next Wes Welker? Could he be the next, I don't like to use Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp because, especially using the arm length and using the weight, I don't think these guys do profile as the same size. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are far bigger than Ladd McConkey to me, so I don't profile them the same way. That's why I use Wes Welker. But could he be the next Wes Welker? I definitely think so. He's very good and he knows a lot of things. I also believe he could be the next guy who can't play outside because he gets jammed up a lot and doesn't play really well through physical contact and just does some all right things. So I think the bottom line for me with Ladd McConkey is I think Ladd McConkey is getting bumped up rankings because people say things like, oh, he's really safe. And I don't understand what that means for fantasy football. Are you saying like he's a really good person on and off field and that he's more likely than most people to be a wide receiver for the next 3 years? Because I definitely believe that. And that's not to say he can't be better than that. But for the most part in fantasy, we really don't care about floor outcomes. The really bottom tier outcomes that are like just kind of valuable for an NFL team, you might get a flash in the pan Hunter Renfrow season, but for the most part, they're not all that valuable. And so I'm just not as sure as other people that Ladd McConkey does have this safe floor in the same way that other people see it. I do think he's more likely to put up some fantasy points in 2 or 3 years than some of these other guys. But if he's not putting up a decent number, I'm not sure that's the amount that I'm going to worry about. So at the end of the day, the number one thing about my rankings that I said last time was that my wide receiver 12, the top 12 wide receivers were becoming a clear tier, and Ladd McConkey was not inside that. Am I a little bit nervous that that's too aggressive? Absolutely. Did I really change my opinion about it? Probably not. But I will say Ladd McConkey is very clearly my wide receiver 13. There's no one behind Ladd McConkey at this point that I think is going to come over him. Now, obviously, that's not including things like draft capital, just completely changing things up. But I don't think Ladd McConkey is going to go any further down, but I still don't see a guy that I want to put in the range with the other 12 players that I like quite a bit more. So Ladd McConkey is still someone, after a long reevaluation and reconsideration and looking at myself and saying, could I be messing this one up? I really do give myself the exact same grade as Ladd McConkey, someone who can be a very usable player at the next level, but someone who I don't see the explosive or high volume play that I'm really looking for when I scout this wide receiver position. And so for that reason, combined with specifically the idea that he has a red flag in production, Ladd McConkey is outside my crucial top 12 wide receivers. And that is all I have for today's video. If you like the show, make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you can make sure to get all future videos as well. And if you like the show, also consider looking at the longer podcast, which is called Fantasy for Real and can be found on most podcasting apps. Until next time.